states that you should not be incarcerated or confined in a federal penitentiary or any detention facility without being convicted of an offense. You serve your time. And for the Supreme Court to rule that this is is not a violation of the double jeopardy standard, Phil, this is juggy boogie, man. This is mumbo jumbo. They just gonna say what they want based on somebody's opinion. They can keep you in prison for the rest of your life.
Yeah, there's two things I want to mention. I think one thing that Bernita just mentioned in terms of the recidivism is really important sort of legally, because that's really the fundamental basis for this whole thing. It's based on your propensity, your likelihood of committing a new crime. Well, that's not true, it turns out, in terms of every study that's ever been done in terms of sex offenders, even people who've been committed into sex offender so-called treatment, the recidivism rates are very low. That's the basis for the Supreme Court decision, it's the basis of lots of state Supreme Court decisions, and it's simply untrue. So this is a very false premise that they're dealing with.
So just to play the devil's advocate, just the type of crimes that inspired these draconian pieces of legislation were really bad and really brutal, similar to the Willie Horton type situation. And then after that, everything just got locked down, et cetera, et cetera. How do we rise above this mass hysteria dealing with these types of crimes? And there are brutal crimes that have happened, just like the brutal drug crime, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we rise above the few things that are sensationalized in TV, in the movies, from which are the basis for these laws, to dealing with a vast majority of people who don't fall anywhere near that type of sensationalized hysteria? How do we distinguish? How do we instead of painting everybody with one broad brush, how do we distinguish people into individuals and treat them accordingly? Is there any hope for anything along those lines?
Well, there's always hope, but I think that it's important to realize that what they've created out of this system is a whole lot of discretion. See, these are, I think we lose a little focus, we keep focusing on the offenses that people allegedly committed years ago. No, it's because they can. And the state has the power and the ability to simply lock you up on a very flimsy pretext, which both of these women have experienced with their sons. They will do it. In the case of Galen's, I think it's important to point out that he was a nationally known, a very well-known advocate for people caught up in these laws. He was an advocate for people who were so-called sex offenders. Just a few weeks before he was arrested on the so-called probation violation, his TED Talk, which you mentioned earlier, was nationally broadcast. It was critical of the state of Virginia and their handling of these cases.
To shut him down.
And exactly right. So what they did was they had the power to lock him up based on nothing, and they did it. And that's what's
You know,
going on.
it's interesting because I do know Galen personally. I know Mwando personally, and neither one of them deserve to be held in indefinite detention under these types of laws and rules and conditions. I mean, Galen was a very vital part of the Justice Roundtable before he was locked up, and Mwando was a very valuable member of the community before he was locked up. I think public education, such as what we're doing right here now in WPFW Crossroads, hosted by Roach Brown, I'm really glad that you're bringing some of these issues out from under the rug, because until a public spotlight is shined on these issues, we'll never be able to do anything about it. So I'm glad that we're taking these steps at this time.
It's kind of scary and frightening to know that somebody's opinion can get you incarcerated for the rest of your life. Not being convicted of a crime or even charged with a crime, but what somebody think you may do in the future. And you could spend the rest of your life incarcerated and catch hell trying to get out. So folk who are listening, this isn't something that just happened to these two ladies, Dr. Thompson and Ms. Bauman. This is happening all over the country. And you got a lot of folk, young men, who had sex, like she said before, at jailbait. You may be 19 or 20, you mess with a girl 15 or 16 who's below statutory age. And you can spend the rest of your life in prison. And these outdated, draconian tests that being administered. I was given the Rothschild test and shot with all kinds of stuff. and this joogie boogie didn't even work, and I'm still the same guy. You know what I mean? And based on what they say, it is scary, folks. You're talking about the days of the Nazi regime when they can just come in and lock you up and throw you away. This can happen to you, me, and anybody. So, folks who are listening, if you know somebody, or you get to somebody, or you have contacts or resources, please bring this issue to the forefront.
Well, Roach, when you asked one of the, what can you do? One of the things you can do is stop being afraid. That's fake. There's nothing to be afraid of. You can also.
Why do you say that?
Well, because they're people. And there are people that have done their time that desperately want to get back into society, that want to have a life. And fear is what the state is perpetrating on everyone. They are building this fear, they are putting it out there. Invite them into your churches, invite them into your homes, talk to people, have neighborhood coffees. Do you know somebody that needs to be supported? If we supported each other, we wouldn't have these fears and we wouldn't have these problems because we would take the state's power away. Hiding them, making the general population afraid, those are all powers of the state. And if we take those powers away from the state, if we open hearts, open minds, if the churches say, yes, come to service, you're very welcome, that changes things dramatically.
You know, I don't know what to say except that this is something, folk, that we need to bring to your attention and keep it publicized. I know some of the draconian rules and regulations for folk who have been convicted of sex offenses or whatever when they come out. And you're talking about the collateral consequences of a man or woman being released, trying to agree in society is one thing. This is below that. They got restrictions that'll blow your mind. You can't live within a certain amount of yards before school. You can't have no contact with kids. You have to have a lie detector test periodically, whatever, a whole bunch of stuff. And if you can't get a job just coming out of prison as a bank robber, a sex offender have less chance as a bank robber or drug dealer of getting a job or a house or a place to stay. This is punishment on top of punishment. This kind of discriminatory practices, it makes America not be what America's supposed to be.
So, Dr. Thompson's son was renting a room in Virginia. So I started to tell the story because he couldn't come back to the district. He was renting a room with a woman who was bipolar, unstable. She was off of her medication, but it was the room he could find. She called his probation officer and said, I don't want him here anymore. And so the probation officer called Richmond and said, I need money for one night, just one night. I'm sure, he said this on the stand, I'm sure I can find him another place to live. He has a good job, he's done nothing wrong. They said, pick him up.
Meaning take him back.
Take him back, yeah, arrest him. And he said, why? He's done nothing wrong. He said he's violated his probation because he doesn't have a place to stay. Well, actually, as a real estate agent, I have serious problems with that because he had a lease. He did have a place to stay. But this was all contrived.
So
it
this
was
is
another
all-
one for our system.
Yeah, this is like an extension of the whole broken, probation and parole systems as well, where you're under kind of like indefinite supervision, as well, sentences that stretch on for years and years and years, like Meek Mill, and you can hardly never get out from others, trip wires that land people back into incarceration. And in the situation with civil commitment, it is really indefinite because you just can't get out from under it.
Well, we're documenting now where in Virginia we have judges who are refusing to hear cases. So they're putting petitions, they're trying to put petitions before the judges, and we have lawyers that are being told not to even bother writing them up because I won't hear them. That really is indefinite.
Phil?
I wanted to say one other piece here that we might be slightly missing. As I mentioned before, obviously there's a lot of discretion that the state has here. They can pull somebody off the street, as we've heard. And when you think about where they use that discretion, as Garnett mentioned earlier, is hugely disproportionate number of African Americans caught in the system. On top of that, hugely disproportionate number of gay men who are also caught up in this. So it's like the usual issues with the criminal system. It targets the most vulnerable people. In this case, it targets African Americans, it targets gay men. And, they can do it and they do it. So I think it's important to see that this is a tool that they use for the same old purposes that they've been doing it for years.
So I just want to go back to something real quick, and Dr. Thompson, I just want to ask
got
you.
a couple of minutes.
This, a couple of minutes, okay, I know these.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, we'll come right back to the next aisle and continue with this. Go ahead, you got it.
Okay, gotcha, okay, yeah. So, these multi-level psychological treatment programs or wherever, where is Mwando with respect to that? And can you just say something about that whole process? Can he actually get out as a result of going to the top? I was at a recent hearing and he was doing quite well. I mean, where's his light at the end of the tunnel?
Exactly. In his early 20s, when he went to court, he was sentenced. When you go to court, either they say at the time that you understand things and you get sentenced, or they say you have some kind of mental illness, and so instead of having court and going to jail, you go to a mental facility. You do one or the other. But in this case with civil commitment in Virginia, all of these men went to court. They were sane as you and me. They served their time, and at the end of serving their time, all of a sudden, they had a mental illness, which is called personality disorder. Now, either you did or you didn't. Either, you can't have it both ways. Dr. Alan Francis, a leading psychiatrist and author, has shown that sex offenders that were not considered as having any kind of mental disorder when they went to court and for their criminal offense trial cannot be tried after the end of their sentence and then declared as having some kind of mental disorder. He says the system is a money racket that railroads people inappropriately into so-called treatment centers. He says these paraphilias are widely recognized as fake diagnosis among the authentic psychiatric community.
So how can you treat something that's fake? You can't. So they call it the containment model, and it's a law enforcement model. Most of the treatment providers are, that we've been able to identify, often are ex-guards, they're ex-probation officers. They have online degrees, if they have a degree at all. I have yet to go to a court case, and I've been to many, many court cases now. I've yet to attend a court case where the actual treatment provider shows up because they have no credentials. Their credentials could be easily attacked. So they send a psychologist who heads the program. In Virginia, we haven't been able to identify a psychiatrist on staff, period.
Okay, we're at the close of this segment. We'll come back just with Mr. Phil Fornier. So I'd like to allow our two guests, Dr. Benita Thompson and Ms. Robin Garnett-Bauman, to get some closing comments before we close this segment. Dr. Thompson? With some closing comments.
I just appreciate you so very much for having me on. Thank you so much. You're an angel.
I can feel your pain, lady, both of y'all. I mean, it really hurts. Ms. Bauman?
Well, thank you, again, thank you very much for shedding light on the shadow prisons and pre-crime preventative detention. We really very much appreciate being able to get the word out. We hope that we can come back on again. I have one parting word too, actually. My son is a political prisoner in Arlington Detention Center, and I want him out.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know what you two ladies in your corner for your loved ones, with the fire and passion that you bring, something's gonna happen. Being here this morning, somebody listening to this show can do something about it. You will be back, and we will shine light on this, because it said before, this is something I never heard of, pre-crime preventive detention. It can think what you might do and lock you up for the rest of your life. Man, this is Jiggy Boogie at his finest.
Yes.
Folks, these kind of things have to stop. And the teacher, you want to give, wait a minute, Phil, you want to give a closing comment, because you can be right back with us, our other two guests will.
No, but I basically say, yes, thank you again for raising this issue for sure. And it's very complicated. I wouldn't say, because most of the listeners here in the local area, I think one place to focus is the state of Virginia. As both of these women had told us about the outrages that have happened there, what's going on with the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia is doing right now is criminal in itself. And all political action should be directed towards the Attorney General and the Governor himself.
Can any legal action be initiated against the Attorney General about this? Has that been explored as a possibility of filing a suit or something against the Attorney General?
Well, there certainly are several in the ongoing right now, including in the case of Gail Bauman's case.
I know, I even signed on to a support letter. It's a letter of support to the Attorney General calling for the release of Galen sometime last year.
Yeah, it's in front of you, Roach,
Yeah, I got
now.
it right
It was
here.
signed by over 150, LGBTQ organizations and concerned individuals, around the country, some very prominent.
Okay.
And there has been crickets, silence from the
Our
Attorney
time is
General.
up. We'll be dealing with this topic again in the future, pre-crime preventive detention. And one of the things we didn't touch on is the high suicide rate of those men who are being held illegally inside these institutions without a criminal conviction. So I want to thank Dr. Bernita Thompson from Roach, whose son is serving indefinite detention. Robin Garnett Bauman, her son is well-known, high-profile, and he's doing this to somebody who's well-known and high-profile. What do you think has happened to the folks that don't nobody know?
Right.
That's
To
right.
Phil Furnish, I want to thank the three of you for joining us, and Phil will be right back on our next hour, and we're going to really go down through the criminal justice field and touch on a few more topics, some of this. Thank you all for joining us, and Merry Christmas. We want to say closing to my beautiful co-host, Nikita, and to my extra beautiful wife, Mertine, to Jackie Craig Bay, Shahid.
We're out.
Well, I couldn't get it in.
You're watching Roach Brown Show. Come back for the second part. You watching Roach Brown Show. Make sure y'all guys come back for the second part.
They'll be available for, you can